Hey, it's Kevin DeWitt here. Welcome to another plugin knowledge session. In this session, we're going to continue on with our little saga of the iZotope Ozone 8 plugin, and we're going to check out the Exciter module this time. So as we've been going through these videos, obviously iZotope Ozone has lots of modules, and the Exciter is one of them. Now, again, it's a multi-band exciter. It can create some little bit of extra life, a little bit of a boost to your audio, but it can also destroy it if you do it too much. So I'm going to show it to you in a mixing session, but mainly on the master bus. So it's basically like mastering, and I'll show you the plugin around, all the features of it, and we'll check it out now. All right, so here we go. I've got a song here. It's an instrumental, and I've basically just put Ozone 8 on the main mix bus here, just so that we can run through this as an example. So I've got the full Ozone 8 here, and I've just loaded one module, just the exciter. So we've obviously been through all of the other components. If you haven't seen those videos, go and check them out. Because I have the advanced version, I could also load this as an individual plugin if I want to not have to have it, the whole Ozone 8 plugin with the individual modules in here. But just for consistency here, just to show you what we're looking at, I thought I'd load it up here. So we got our usual settings. We can turn it off, turn it on, we can solo it. We can load presets just for the Exciter module. And if we had other modules in here, we could move them around and change the order of the modules. You can see there's some little meters there that's flicking up and down. And that's just because I've got some analog emulators in this mix, and they are causing a little bit of noise. Okay, so you'll see here in this graph, we've got multiple bands. It's defaulted to 4 bands here, but we can actually reduce the bands. We can click on the cross to remove bands, or plus to insert them. We can also right click and remove, copy, paste, a few things here. We can adjust the location of our bands by just dragging. So this is our frequency range here. So we've got one that's targeting the low end, some mids, high mids, and very highs. When I use this, I generally just work in 3 bands, so I generally will have that quite high. So that's about 160, about 3.5K there, so a big mid band, and then the rest is generally my top end there. I don't usually use 4 bands unless I have something that I really need to target, but in this case here, we'll just start with 3 at the moment. Okay, so we've got a standard view here, but we can also switch over to a filter view here. And what this is it's a sort of a post filter. So when we put our exciter on, if we find that we're getting a little bit too much top end or something like that that's being introduced, getting a little bit too brittle at the top, we can actually filter out here. We can change the Q by dragging that, and we can place a little bit of a filter there, just to tame those top ends there. So we can't boost or anything. We can change the frequency, but we can just cut it a little bit there, which we'll play with when we get into that. We've got an oversampling option here, which is going to increase your CPU load, but it's supposed to also increase your quality if you need it by doing a lot more sampling segments and that sort of stuff. We can also link the bands, so once we link them, any adjustment we make on one will be made on every single band, or we can unlink it and do each one individually. We can use this module in either stereo mode, which is standard mode, or we can put it into mid-side and do different settings on the mids or the sides and have a combination of the two. Every single one of these bands has the same controls. We have an amount, we have a mix, and we have the type of exciter. So the amount control adjusts how much of the harmonic excitement or excitation, as they call it, for this band is introduced. So this is the amount of the harmonic content. Then the mix is really the blend between the affected signal and the dry original signal. So these two settings are obviously going to work hand in hand. So this is more the amount of harmonic content, and this is just then the blend of them with the dry signal. And as for the types, just to quickly run through them, you've got analog, which the analog mode emulates the sound of transistor type odd harmonics, giving a driven grit to your audio. Retro is based on characters of transistors with a slowly decaying row of odd harmonics. Tape offers a brighter sounding saturation due to the odd harmonics found when saturating analog tape. Tube, characterized by its clear tonal excitation with an emphasis on dynamic or transient attacks. If you can't tell, I'm reading these from the manual because it's the best way to explain them. Warm generates only even harmonics that decay quickly. Triode, accurately modeled after a tube circuit for realistic analog warmth. It uses only half of a tube circuit for a subtler overdrive than the dual triode mode. And then you've got the dual triode mode, which models a full circuit using a vacuum tube introducing more pronounced overdrive with a warmer tone. So we will flick through each one of those and have a listen. So the concept of an exciter is to add extra harmonics to your content, which can present as distortion or analog warmth or extra life, bit of lift to your sound. But overdone, it can also start to sound harsh and not very pleasant. So it's about getting the right balance of what you want to do out of this. All right, so to give you a true representation of what the sound of these are going to do, I'm going to exaggerate this extremely, and I'm going to reduce it to a single band. So we're going to apply this excitement on the entire signal across the board. And what I'm going to do is I'll leave it at 100% mix. So we're going to have no dry signal. It's going to be total harmonic content, excited, whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to bring that in with the amount, and we're going to start from the top just to give you an idea of what they sound like. So this is what it sounds like with it bypassed. We bring the plugin on. Okay, we really hear no difference there because I've got nothing happening. I've got no amount there. And I will start to bring it in. So you can hear the distortion there. So we'll leave it at 100%, and I'll just turn that up a little bit, and we'll just flick between them so you can hear the difference at full distortion. Obviously, we wouldn't use it this way unless you really wanted distortion on a track or something. Okay, so as you can tell, a very sort of unpleasant, very distorted. Now, there's many ways to do this. So you might say, okay, I want that set to 100%, so total distortion, but then change the mix. So that's with nothing blended in. You could bring a little bit in there. More than likely what you're going to do though is you're probably not going to go full amount. So you're going to pick a value. So for the sake of this, let's say 7, all right? So let's just do that comparison again with a level of 7. So even at a level of 7 there, you could hear that some of them were still quite distorted and unpleasant. But again, traditionally what you're going to do is then probably mix in a little portion of it. So let's say we'll go around 50%. So let's start with a bypass. So here's the bypass button. Bring it in. So it's all about finding the right setting. So unfortunately, some of them were still distorting, and it's still probably not the way you would do it. But let's also then, let's go to our multi-band setup here. So we're back to a default setting here. So we've got multiple bands. And if we were to, let's link the bands and just bring them up a little bit. I'm going to go to 6, and then I'm going to drop this down to 50%. Now if we bypass the entire thing, you can hear there's an obvious volume increase with this one. So let's just try it with a tape one, because a tape one's usually quite common. Again, there's a volume change. What we can do is we can turn on gain match. Now the other feature you can use is you can use this learn function here, which will analyze the frequency spectrum of the song and adjust the bands appropriately to sort of try to work out where it thinks you should target your bands around for maximum sort of separation and effect. So let's just see what it recommends. Okay, so it's settled on 151 for the low end and 1.64K, and then a bit here, and then 8K and above. So the other options we have, very similar to pretty much all the other modules in Ozone, is that we can solo individual modules. So we can hear the impact, but we can also bypass. So we can truly hear what's going on. But what you can obviously also do is you can leave them bypassed. So you might say, okay, I like the sound of it, but I'm not really keen on what it's doing to the bass. I want the bass component to stay clean. So I bypass it there, and suddenly our bass is nice and clean. So our bass will sound like this instead of, you can hear that kick sort of crunching up there. So if you don't want that extra increase, you don't want that, then you can leave it like that. And it's bypassed. The exciter's still working on the other bands, but it's not working on that one. And you can bypass any one you want. You know, you're not restricted to which ones you want to do. Similar to the other ones, sometimes people ask, well, why don't you just remove one of the bands? But what happens is, for instance here, if I leave this bypassed, then what it does is 150 hertz and below has no exciter on it. If I actually remove the band, then now you've got this whole scope is one band. So that's the advantage of not removing a band, is that you can have it bypassed, but still have it locked away. If I remove it, then it gets absorbed into another band, and then you either need to bypass that entire band or you need to have the exciter on it. So you lose the ability to bypass this little section here. Now, as we also saw, if we go over to the other look here where we've got this filter, so we can play with that. So you can see we get a frequency spectrum shot there. So if we say it's a bit bright, and this only impacts the wet signal, not the dry. So if you find after you've added your exciter, it gets a little bit too tinny up here and you just want to control it a bit, then you've got this filter here. Again, as I said, that only affects the actual wet signal, so the dry signal is unaffected by that. So the other option we had was to run this in mid-side mode. Okay, so we've got our mid, we've got our side, so we can solo either one of those. And again, you've got multi-band for each, and it shows us which one we are affecting. So we could, in theory, even say, okay, we want certain bands affected here, or we could bypass the mids. So this is what the mid sounds like. And if we add that back in, So you might decide that in the mids, we don't want that. Maybe we don't want that. Maybe we want to focus our attention only on this mid section here. Or maybe we remove a band and we come up here. So we're concentrating our exciter on the vocal component here. So we might do that there. But we can still solo in that as well. And then we could switch over to our sides and we might say, okay, well, on the sides, we want to do the opposite. And what I'm going to do is concentrate my exciter on the top end and not the low end, because that's what I mainly want in my sides, is some nice top cymbals and whatever else. So we can solo that and have a listen. We obviously need to do some settings here, which I didn't realize it didn't carry the settings over, so that was a bit silly, but let's do that now. And we could potentially have a different type than our mids. So in our mids, we might have a different type altogether from our sides. So I think I had the bands linked there, so I'm just curious because that did not leave. Okay, so that's interesting. I thought you could do them independently, but obviously I've just learned something new myself. So you can't have a different bypass setting for the different bands in each of the sides. So you can have a different type, you can have different values, but you have to have the exciter enabled on the same band. So in this case here, let's just run with that. But there's another simple way around that. So we can still use the same concept, but what we do is now we've got our bands, and we've got our top end, we've got our low end, and they are both enabled. And in our mids here, we're going to have tape. But as I said, I don't want anything on the sides here. So I'm going to turn the mix and the amount down to 0 on this top one. So in theory, I've bypassed it, but I just haven't bypassed it. And in the sides, we're going to do the same thing, but with the mids. And I've just got it set to dual triad. And if we listen to that, you know, that's pretty extreme. So that's what our sides sound like, bypassed. And there's our mids with so we can start adjusting things quite drastically and having different effects there. So I'll just bring that in and out with that. Now, this is not necessarily a setting that I would use. I'm just doing an example here of the power that you have and the control you've got over using this. And we can obviously switch it back to stereo if we wish, and we're back to the way we were before. It usually takes the mid side. As you can see, it's got the settings of the tape and that. So we can start adjusting back to our stereo component if we so want to. So there you go. There's the Exciter module in iZotope Ozone 8. Try it out on your next mix if you've got Ozone 8. Otherwise, demo the product, check it out, let me know what you think. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Hopefully this video has been helpful. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.